The morning sunlight reflected from the towering glass walls of Vantage Global headquarters, making the building appear almost untouchable. Employees streamed through the revolving doors, each carrying laptops, coffee cups, and the determined expressions that came with working for one of the world's most influential technology companies. Black luxury cars lined the entrance as investors, executives, and media guests arrived for the annual leadership summit. Security officers greeted every visitor with practiced efficiency while photographers documented the arrival of industry leaders. Inside, the marble lobby buzzed with anticipation. Massive digital displays showcased the company's record-breaking profits, while banners celebrated innovation, leadership, and excellence. Among the crowd walked Maya Carter, a 34-year-old black business executive wearing a tailored navy blue pantsuit with a crisp white blouse. Her hair was neatly styled into a low bun, and she carried only a slim leather portfolio instead of the expensive briefcases most executives displayed. She moved with calm confidence, observing the busy atmosphere without trying to attract attention. Although several people glanced at her, most assumed she was another consultant or guest attending the conference. At the registration desk, the receptionist smiled warmly. "Good morning. May I have your name?" "Maya Carter." The receptionist searched the guest list before her expression changed slightly. She looked back at Maya with renewed respect. "Welcome, Ms. Carter. Everything has been prepared for you. Here's your executive badge." Maya thanked her politely and clipped the badge to her jacket without reading the title printed beneath her name. She had learned long ago that true authority rarely needed to announce itself. Across the lobby, conversations suddenly shifted as a tall man surrounded by assistants entered through the main doors. Richard Lawson, the company's famous CEO, was known throughout the business world for transforming Vantage Global into a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Expensive tailored suits, private jets, and magazine covers had become part of his public image. Employees straightened their posture as he passed, eager to avoid disappointing the powerful executive whose approval could determine careers. Richard barely acknowledged anyone except senior executives. His assistant hurried beside him, reading the day's schedule. Investor breakfast at 9. Leadership address at 10. Board session at 11. Richard nodded impatiently. "Let's stay on schedule. I don't want surprises today." As he approached the VIP reception area, executives formed small groups around him, laughing at his jokes and complimenting the company's latest achievements. Cameras flashed as reporters captured every handshake and smile. Maya entered the reception room a few moments later. She noticed Richard speaking with several investors and decided to introduce herself professionally before the morning meetings began. Waiting for a natural pause in the conversation, she stepped forward with a calm smile. "Good morning, Mr. Lawson. I'm Maya Carter. It's a pleasure to meet you." She extended her hand respectfully. Richard looked briefly at her outstretched hand before studying her face. His eyes narrowed slightly. "And you are?" "Maya Carter." He glanced quickly at her simple business attire and modest portfolio. Assuming she was a junior consultant hoping to network with executives, he smirked. "I don't shake hands with people who haven't earned my respect." His words were loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. For a brief second, the room became silent. Several executives exchanged uncomfortable glances, while others laughed softly, eager to match the CEO's reaction. One investor awkwardly looked away, sensing the unnecessary insult. Maya slowly lowered her hand. Her expression never changed. "I understand," she replied quietly. Richard turned back toward the investors as though the conversation had never happened. "So, gentlemen, as I was saying, success comes from knowing who deserves your attention." More laughter followed. Maya simply nodded once and stepped aside without responding. She walked toward a nearby window overlooking the city skyline, her face calm and unreadable. An older board member standing across the room had witnessed the entire exchange. He frowned deeply. Another director leaned closer. Did Richard really just say that? The older man sighed. I'm afraid he did. Does he know who she is? The director slowly shook his head. No. Neither man said another word. Elsewhere in the reception hall, whispers quietly began spreading among several senior officials who had recognized Maya immediately after her arrival. They knew she wasn't an ordinary guest. They also knew Richard had made a mistake that could not be undone. Meanwhile, Maya remained composed, accepting a glass of water from a server and thanking him with genuine kindness. She greeted junior employees with the same respect she offered executives. A young intern accidentally bumped into her while carrying presentation folders. I'm so sorry, ma'am. It's perfectly all right, Maya said warmly, helping gather the papers from the floor. The intern smiled gratefully. Thank you. As the intern hurried away, one executive quietly observed the interaction. Interesting, he whispered. What? She treats everyone exactly the same. Across the room, Richard continued entertaining investors with confident stories about his leadership. He had completely forgotten the brief interaction near the entrance. To him, Maya Carter was insignificant. To everyone who knew the truth, the countdown had already begun. Within minutes, the board of directors would open the executive leadership meeting. Inside that conference room, Richard Lawson would discover that the woman whose handshake he had publicly refused was not a consultant, not a visitor, and not someone seeking his approval. She was the one person whose authority stood above his own. The executive conference room occupied the top floor of Vantage Global headquarters, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city's skyline. A polished walnut table stretched through the center of the room, with leather chairs arranged for board members, senior executives, and invited investors. Large digital screens displayed the company's logo beside the words Executive Leadership Meeting. Fresh coffee had been placed beside neatly organized folders containing confidential reports. Every seat had been assigned in advance, and employees quietly made final preparations before the meeting began. Richard Lawson entered confidently, followed by his assistant and several vice presidents. He loosened his jacket slightly and glanced around the room with the familiar confidence of a man accustomed to being the most powerful person present. Let's make this quick, he said while placing his tablet on the table. After this meeting, we have media interviews. Several executives nodded immediately. Of course. Richard sat in the large chair positioned at the head of the table, believing it would remain his place for years to come. Moments later, directors from the parent company entered together. Unlike the earlier reception, there was very little conversation. Their expressions were calm, serious, and focused. They greeted one another professionally before taking their seats. Finally, the chairman of the board entered. Every executive stood respectfully. The chairman thanked everyone before looking toward the doorway. Please come in. Maya Carter walked quietly into the conference room. Richard barely looked at her. He assumed she had entered to observe the meeting or deliver documents. The chairman smiled warmly. Good morning, Ms. Carter. Good morning. Instead of directing her toward the visitors section, he gestured toward the chair directly beside his own. Your seat is here. Several executives exchanged confused looks. Richard frowned slightly. His assistant looked down at the printed seating chart, then looked again. Something wasn't right. The chairman waited until everyone was seated before opening the meeting. Thank you all for attending today's special leadership session. The room became completely silent. Before discussing quarterly performance, we have an important announcement from our parent company's board. Richard folded his hands confidently. He expected another acquisition announcement or expansion strategy. Instead, the chairman continued. Effective this morning, the board has unanimously approved a new executive governance structure designed to strengthen long-term leadership. Several executives leaned forward. The chairman turned toward Maya. It is my pleasure to formally welcome Ms. Maya Carter as Executive Chair of Vantage Global Holdings. A wave of surprise spread through the room. The chairman continued. As Executive Chair, Ms. Carter assumes immediate authority over corporate governance, executive evaluations, strategic oversight, and leadership appointments. Silence. Absolute silence. Richard stared across the table without blinking. For several seconds, he said nothing. One vice president quietly whispered. Executive Chair? Another executive slowly nodded. That means... Yes. Richard finally spoke. There must be some misunderstanding. The chairman calmly looked toward him. There is no misunderstanding. Richard forced a small smile. No one informed me about this. The decision was finalized after yesterday evening's board vote. Richard looked directly at Maya for the first time. She met his eyes calmly. No anger. No satisfaction. Only quiet professionalism. The chairman continued reading from the official resolution. Ms. Carter has served as senior advisor for several international restructuring projects, increasing shareholder value across multiple Fortune 500 organizations. Her leadership record speaks for itself. Several investors quietly applauded. Richard remained frozen. Only minutes earlier he had publicly dismissed the same woman in front of guests. Now every executive in the room was standing as the chairman invited her to address the company. Maya rose gracefully. Thank you. Her voice was calm but carried naturally across the room. I appreciate the confidence the board has placed in me. She paused briefly. I also understand that leadership transitions often create uncertainty. Every executive listened carefully. My goal is not to erase the achievements that brought this company here. She looked around the room, making eye contact with employees from every department. My responsibility is to strengthen a culture where respect, accountability, and excellence exist together. Richard shifted uncomfortably. The words felt directed at him even though she had never mentioned his name. Maya continued. Great companies are not defined only by revenue. She paused again. They are defined by how people are treated, from interns and receptionists to executives and shareholders. Several board members quietly nodded. Richard lowered his eyes toward the documents in front of him. For the first time in years, he found himself without a response. The chairman spoke again. Beginning today, all executive performance reviews will be conducted under Ms. Carter's supervision. Another announcement followed. Current leadership practices, workplace culture, employee engagement, and executive conduct will undergo a comprehensive review. The significance was immediately clear. Nothing would remain outside Maya's authority. Richard's assistant slowly closed her notebook. She understood exactly what this meant. Around the table, executives who had laughed during the reception no longer smiled. Some avoided looking toward Richard altogether. Others quietly reviewed their notes, realizing the balance of power had changed within minutes. The chairman concluded the announcement. I expect every member of this leadership team to offer Ms. Carter your complete cooperation. One by one, directors acknowledged the instruction. So noted. Absolutely. Of course. Finally, all eyes turned toward Richard. The confident CEO who had dismissed a simple handshake only minutes earlier now understood that the woman he had underestimated was no ordinary visitor. She was now the highest-ranking executive in the room, and every decision about the future of his leadership would pass across her desk first.